Okay, perfect. We are live now. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our audience who have joined us today. This is the second LinkedIn Live for 2021. And just we'll start with a very brief round of introductions. But before that, let me do a quick audio and video check. So, if anybody has already joined, can you please confirm whether you can hear us and see us clearly? If you can, just type yes in the chat box. We'll wait for about 10-15 seconds just to confirm the audio video is working fine for the audience. Okay, perfect. Let's continue. Let me give a quick round of introductions before we begin today. So my name is Harsh. I have been a ship's captain. I've been an investment banker, and now I work as an executive coach. I primarily coach senior leaders in change management and how they can be future ready. And today we have a very special guest joining us all the way from Malaysia. Welcome, Vikram. Thank you so much for taking time out for the session today. I know it's a bit late, but thank you for accepting the invitation today.
Thank you, Harsh. The pleasure is always mine. It's good to chat with you. And no, it is not late. When you work around the clock across global time zones and working from home, it is never late.
Perfect. Thank you. So let me give a very brief introduction about Vikram. So Vikram is the head of HR and cluster lead for Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and an HR business partner for East Asia for British Council. I hope I got everything right, Vikram. And
Yes.
I'm not going to go into the full bio, but Vikram has been a very seasoned HR professional, very passionate about leadership and management, and that's why we thought he would be a good guest to invite and talk about the contemporary topic we have in hand. But before that, Vikram, is there anything you want to share about your personal or professional life which people don't know about?
Well, hello to everyone. Whoever is watching is live. I've been an HR professional for almost completing 2 decades now, 18 years. Have worked with multiple organizations. Have been fortunate to uh, cover almost all gamuts of HR, primarily focusing in talent acquisition and HR business partnering space. Currently with British Council in Malaysia, have been in Malaysia for the last 10 years plus, and have been associated with organizations like Tata's, HSBC, BAE Systems, AirAsia, and now with British Council. Have been fortunate to work with stakeholders across the globe. And personally, yeah, here with my family, enjoying my time pretty much in KL, Kuala Lumpur.
So you conveniently skipped the part. I asked you what is that people don't know about you, because all this we know about you. Tell us something which people don't
It
know.
is all there on LinkedIn.
Uh, Tell us something which people don't know. Yeah.
Well, it can be seen. I'm a foodie. I'm a good food critic. I think I'm a very much a cricket lover. I used to represent my organizations while I was back in India. Malaysia is not a very pro cricket country, but I'm quite overwhelmed with how India and Australia test matches happened yesterday. And something people don't know about me is, yes, I'm a big cricket fan. You can ask me anything on cricket, and I can talk for hours together, and also anything about food and also about movies. So these are three things which is probably not there on my LinkedIn, or a lot of people don't know. Thanks, Harsh.
Food, movies, and cricket. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Vikram. So, let me set some context for today's discussion. Right, I mean, we've spoken about leadership and trust in some of our previous sessions, but while we are into the new year, the external environment has not drastically changed. Right, I think. There is still uncertainty around. There is still business growth is a bit challenging. News around virus, second strain of virus, around vaccine, all this is there is still some a level of uncertainty around, right? And I
Yes.
think remote working will still continue to be a norm for a large part of the year for most of the organizations. So challenge around building trust in a remote work environment will still be a challenge leaders will grapple, right? A large part of last year for most of the organizations was just trying to figure out things, settling in town, keeping the lights on, keeping employees engaged, motivated. But I think building trust goes many level deeper, right? Just beyond the employee engagement aspect. So we thought it will be a good topic to discuss and hear from you around your experiences, your views on how should leaders plan ahead for 2021. So that's really the context on how to lead with trust in the new normal, and not just this year but also years to come really. So I'll shoot out the first question to Vikram. One is obviously in your own industry, in your own geographic locations, in your own interaction with leaders. What is that you are hearing and seeing now that we are 9, 10 months into this current crisis? We are into the new year. How are leaders looking at 2021?
Okay, I think a very good question and very much relevant to today's scope, today's scenario where we are what 12 days into this year. But having said that, a lot of people have already started talking that only the year has changed, but a lot of things remain the same. So mentally, we have kind of reset the clock for the year to change, but actually physically or personally or professionally a lot of things are continuing the same. So I think it is quite prevalent for us to look at what has happened from a leadership and trust perspective very quickly, and then kind of move ahead to what 2021 should look like. So what has happened? It has been shock. So I'm purely speaking from a leadership perspective, Harsh. It has been shock initially with what happened February, March last year. Then there was denial. No, this cannot happen to us, cannot happen to my organization, cannot happen to my country. Then there was courage showcased by the leadership teams to come out of it very quickly, April, May, June kind of a period, and resilience. And then there was that period of June onwards, right till December last year, about showcasing, leading from the front, showing empathy, providing the right level of support and guidance, as well as providing the right level of transparent comms, which has been the key to trust people. One definite outcome which has happened over the last 9 months since March till December has been through this crisis, employees and people in various organizations have been clearly able to experience good leaders. And I would not want to go to this path of bad leaders, but the not so good leaders. So people have very clearly, visibly seen, experienced what does good leadership look like, what is not so good leadership look like. So that's passed very briefly, probably in a minute or so.
Mm.
What should leaders prepare for 2021? I think it should be more transparency around what is happening within their organizations. I'm a firm believer that, and I've read it, I've experienced it, during such crisis, having more comms communications than less, or over communication than lesser communication, is always beneficial. And the right level of comms, ensuring engagement levels are sustained whilst focusing on reviving the income generation. So some organizations are doing really well, Harsh. Some organizations have really gone behind 2 years, 3 years back, and they need to now kind of generate revenue, generate income, and that is their primary focus than everything else from a people perspective. So while they do that, engaging with the people at the same time, and also, as much as we are thinking optimistically about 2021, this year is also going to be a year where probably a lot of people will lose their jobs. So redundancies might happen. So it is very important for leaders to communicate at the right time, the right level of comms of where the organization is heading from a profit and loss perspective. And if there are redundancies, giving people a heads up so that they're very clear of what is to expect of them, and along with obviously retaining the high performance.
Interesting. So you mentioned an interesting aspect around the good leaders and not so good leaders, right? And if you look at that same definition of yours, especially in the context of trust, right? So, what, in your opinion, are good leaders doing and not so good leaders not doing?
I think what I along in the entire session, you will see me railing around some of the points which are quite common, but they will be repetitive, and I think that will probably drive home the point, Harsh. But the fact is, what are good leaders doing? Good leaders are giving the bad news first. Good
Hmm.
leaders, or tough news, whatever you want to call it. They are communicating very well. They are engaging virtually. They have adapted. A lot of good leaders were very good in face to face communication or email communications. But in this new era where Zoom and Microsoft Teams and everything has taken over, or Skype has taken over, good leaders have actually adapted, been agile, and have adapted and are communicating very well with their stakeholders. And I think what they have done is they have ensured that they empower their leadership teams below. So these are what the good leaders have done to build that trust. So a leader cannot single-handedly run an organization. They have empowered their second in line, third in line to kind of drive those level of people-centric decisions or strategic interventions. What are the not so good leaders doing? The not so good leaders are micromanaging. The not so good leaders are not having that trust in some of their people and obviously micromanaging. The not so great leaders are waiting for the opportunity to invite people or their employees back into the organization the moment the lockdowns open. And they're like, I will monitor you in front of my eyes, and only then I think you're performing. And the not so good leaders are also under the impression that if a person is working from home, that person is not as productive or is not delivering to the level or extent what is expected from that person. So I think there's a clear definition difference and a gap between the good leaders and the not so good leaders, and trust becoming the centric element in both of them, and how they kind of work around with it is very important. I'm not sure,
Well,
does that answer to you, Harsh? But I think
it
that's
does,
what.
and I'll take a leaf from what you mentioned, and especially around the physical presence and trust in the context of physical presence, right? I think there is a sense that when you're physically present, when somebody in front of you, some leaders may have some sort of perceived level of control, right? Then there is a control I have. I can see people in front of me. I can see whether they are at the desk or not, they're working or not working. And when somebody is not in front of you physically, some leaders could actually have this perceived lack of control, that I am not having the control. And that could also stem some sort of fear in leaders, saying, look, fear, or what are my team members doing? Where are they? Are they working, not working? So it all then spirals into your own sense of fear, and in a way, in sense of insecurity. And that physical presence sometimes actually gives you that sense of control and allays those fears. Whereas when you're remote, some leaders may be afraid that since somebody is not in front of me, I don't know what is really happening, right? To some extent, I think it is justified, but beyond that, I think you then end up projecting your own fears on your own teams, right? So what is your view around what should leaders do, right? Because remote working will still continue, right? So how do you gain the trust, right, of your employees, saying, while you may not be physically in front of me, I still trust you? How do you actually gain and build that trust?
Fantastic. I go back to old school or kind of the basics around it, Harsh. And the basic around is you start with the word I trust you
Hmm.
and see magic happen from there. I have seen it when I have led teams. I have seen it when some good leaders have led their teams, whether it was virtually or even face to face, pre-COVID era. When you say to a person or your team member, I trust you, I think it makes wonders, because obviously it does not work 100% of the time. It is not a foolproof solution, but more often than not, it does work wonders, which is probably the easiest way to do it. The somewhat difficult path to go, which is better, is evaluate them on their productivity and not on the time spent on. So have clear goals for the next 3 months. We all know we are going through a very difficult phase. There is families at home, there are children at home, there is elderly at home. So everybody, you don't know behind this camera what is happening aside along in their house, and working from home becoming a new normal. So it is very important to assign your people tasks as leaders and say, if you do these 10 things by this particular time and period, for me that is productive. Now, whether, unless you have your calls to attend, whether you do it 7 to 9 in the morning and take a 1 hour break for a walk around in the park, or whether you do it 7 to 9 in the evening, or you take a nap of half an hour in the afternoon, shouldn't really bother to the leader at any point in time. And when I mean leader, I'm also including the managers in between. So till the time the people are productive against a mutually agreed output or an outcome, which is periodic for at least, I think quarterly is a good period to kind of evaluate. I think that trust element will only build from there. And I would say these two would be the easiest solutions any leader or manager should kind of implement. And it does work wonders. I have seen it myself.
That's a great point, right? The first point you mentioned around, in a way, your starting position or default position should be I trust you. So I'm
Yeah,
giving you benefit of doubt. So when you're saying that my internet is not working or I don't have power or something like that, it is actually happening, and hence you're telling me that. So I'm starting with the default position that I trust you, right? Unless you give me a reason not to trust you, right? So my default position should be that. And the second interesting point you mentioned was around focusing more on outcomes, right? Instead of saying
yes,
how many hours, where you are, I don't care, as long as the work is getting done. So if we have agreed mutually and the outcome is very clearly defined for that time period, whether you work 10 hours, 12 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, it does not really matter as long as also focusing more on outcomes rather than on execution. Because what has also happened in this period is that there has been this inflated sense of productivity, saying I'm 10 hours, 12 hours, I'm online, that means I'm being very productive, which is not the case, right? There could be days where you have been online all throughout, but you have not achieved actually anything. So I
correct.
think focusing and planning on outcome basis would be the key, as you rightly mentioned, right? Now
And
you
it
also.
is, I mean, all of us, sorry, but all of us are, yeah, it is like in recruitment. Like when you hire the person, you have only evaluated the person for 1 hour, or probably three interview rounds, so 3 hours or maximum 5 hours with an objective or a psychometric assessment. But
Mhm.
all you have done is 5 hours into the process, and you say on day one, I trust you. So you trust that person who's coming new into the organization, but at the same time, somebody who's been with you, just because that person is not sitting in front of your eyes, you say, I now don't trust you and I want to see you kind of performing. So I think that's that level of, that's where the default position of I trust you starts from there. And people do, I mean, again, relating it to recruitment as an example, I think none of us, when we were working from home or even in office when we used to go, we get up in the morning to say, hey, I don't really want to do a productive day, or hey, I am not. Yeah, we can have a bad Monday or a Monday blues or a dull Tuesday or a dull Wednesday, but none of us get up every day in the morning and say, hey, I don't really want to be productive today, or I don't want to work.
Mm.
So I think that's where the level of trust to start from there, and just let people express themselves.
Yeah, very. I think that's an interesting analogy with recruitment, right? You only spend that much time, and a lot of times you just go by a gut feeling, right? You feel this is the right candidate, and then so there is a risk in that, right? Sometimes it works out, sometimes it does not work at all. So that's a very good example, right? I also want to extend the same thought around focusing on outcomes. Now, I always believe trust is a two-way street, right? It is not just that leaders can just trust and employees do not reciprocate, right? So, what are your thoughts, right? Because if I trust you as an employee, then you should do your part, really, right? Because then only that trust builds. But if we agree on certain things and do not deliver on time and all, then somewhere that trust is broken to some extent, right? So, what are your thoughts around that?
As a leader,
Yes.
I think one of the easiest things as a leader you should do is just be authentic, be yourself.
Hmm.
Um, I can take my own example rather than taking anybody's example. I have had in my career of 18 years, I've had some great leaders I've worked with, whom I still connect with. And there have been some, again, not so great leaders I have worked with. And you can, when you roll back in history, you can always very clearly distinguish between both of them. And when you start determining what are the common areas which determine who was great and who wasn't, then you start saying being authentic, one, being transparent, effectively communicating. I will say a big word which is very difficult, not playing politics, but again, politics is to each or his own experience. So we can't comment much around that. And
Hmm.
giving constant feedback, and giving a regular. So there's a continuous feedback mechanism, and just being authentic, ensuring regular communications is happening, and ensuring that you empathize with your people at the end of the day. I think those are some of the common traits you will see, and that you genuinely care in a good leader compared to a not so good leader. And this is, I'm purely talking, not theoretical, but purely through my own experience.
Yeah, and I love that. I love the word authentic, right? It is so important that as a leader, you have to be genuine and authentic. Your intention should be very clear. So when you're asking somebody how are you, you actually are meaning that I want to ask you how are you, and not just for the sake of it, right? So, and similarly, when you're saying I trust you, your intent is to trust, and not that I'm saying I trust you, but then within next 15 minutes I'm calling you saying what are you doing, where are you, and so I'm not. So I think the intent part has to be very very clear, and a lot of leaders really struggle in this space, right? So thank you for sharing that actually. And
It
the other
is an
thing,
interesting. Sorry to pause your thought there, Harsh, but it's an example I would want to give everybody who's attending this call, this session, and we did that practice in our own leadership team a couple of weeks back. So, as a leader, when you have a call, a one-to-one call with your subordinate or your colleague or whatever, the first question you ask is, "How are you doing?" And the answer 99% of the times is, "I'm doing fine." And immediately the leader jumps onto the next thing. Okay, we are here to discuss this. Let's look at the list. And it's a one-to-one virtual session I'm talking about. I would give a suggestion here to a lot of people, if you are leaders out there. When you say, "How are you doing?" and the person says, "Okay," you pause for the next 5 to 10 seconds. And that silence is a lot of silence for the next 5 to 10. And then ask very authentically, "How are you doing?" The same question. And many times, more often than not, you will get a very different response and the person will open up. And that is what will showcase. And we've tried this. It's a proved mechanism, and it really lets people open up about what is happening in their lives. And that first 2 to 3 minutes, authentically, what you spend as a leader drives home most of the trust element of what the next 27 minutes or 1 hour you speak to the person.
it's a lovely point, right? I think, and I always believe that some of the best conversation happens when you're silent, right? So when you're providing this safe space for people to express with that authenticity, I think people want to be heard, right? People want to be listened, provided that they can trust you. Otherwise, we all want to be somebody to hear or listen to us, right? But that effort to create that safe and trustworthy environment is onto the leaders. And once you create that, I think people open up. People want to share. This is one of the human ways to connect with people, right? It's a great point. And along with authenticity, I'll also add the point that do what you're saying, right? So your words and actions should match, right? So while there's a meaning to it, saying I I'm saying what I mean, and then I'm going to follow up to do what I say, right? So say, do, mean. I think these have to be in congruence. A lot of times you say things which you don't mean. Sometimes you say, but you don't do, right? And people see through that, right?
I was just going to say that. I mean, all I was going to say to your comment was people eventually see through. They might sustain in their jobs just wanting to sustain due to the pandemic, due to various other reasons, but they see through in leaders that this person is only saying it for saying, and he doesn't mean, or it does not follow up in actions eventually. So it can be quite clearly seen, and it can be quite clearly seen with great leaders who actually follow through. And again, great leaders are seen. I mean, gone are the days we were talking of office. It's been 9 months. A lot of us haven't been into office, but when you were in the pre-COVID era, you could see on the floor who are the great leaders, and people used to follow them. But even in a virtual scenario, also you can see who are the great leaders who have taken this as an opportunity and literally driven people through their one-to-one conversations and the town halls and the group conversations.
Yeah, and I'll add also the point around if you want people to share, then have the courage to share from your side as well. Sometimes when you open up your heart out and you are we use this word vulnerable a lot, but it's generally right when you are having the courage to share how you're feeling, and I think sometimes that also creates that safe space that yes, I can see my leaders also are opening up and sharing, and then let me also step forward and share how I'm feeling, right?
It just makes the trust, it takes it 2 notches higher than what you anticipate, because here you see a leader whom you've seen in a different light now being a little vulnerable in front of you, but that also opens up an opportunity to, and there are some very common elements. I have had leaders where I have had very common discussions around cricket. I'm recently, I cannot take his name, but in one of my current leaders whom I speak to regularly, he cooks very well, and
Hmm.
our basic discussions start with what he has cooked over the weekend or what he's cooking, and it has got nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with the kind of work he does or what we need to work on an assignment, but it's purely around his cooking. So it's very interesting. It makes you feel that the leader also has a different aspect to life than only what you deliver in a very professional environment.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing all those gems with us, Vikram. I want to end up with one final question, right? In the last 9 to 10 months, what have been your personal biggest learnings? And how are you now taking those learnings forward?
Okay, so when 2020 started, I definitely thought this is the year which is going to be very big for me, had huge plans for it. And when I revisited that now, none of it was actually achieved. And I'm not saying it out of sadness. I'm purely saying because I know there are a lot of people who thought or had very big plans for it, but kind of didn't achieve for many other reasons than one. So for me, individually, few learnings were be ready to embrace change. Not in my wildest dreams, I had thought that 2020 will turn out to be the year, and I had some big plans. Patience, grit, and determination to get through this phase. It will continue in this year also. I have a lot of patience and determination and grit to kind of go through that phase, and I think a lot of people do. So you should continue. Look at the positives, what is around you. I have never looked out of my balcony so often before for the years I've been staying here than I have been seeing for the last 9 months.
Hmm.
I have never cleaned up my house as much, or I have not done a lot of other things, good things, which I would have wanted to do, or read a book, or anything. You always keep those things in the back burner. So look at the good things around you. Stay home, stay safe. It was a big learning for me that a lot can be achieved by staying home. I'm an out and out extrovert. I'm an out and out social person who loves going out, but it had to control. And so, staying at home and rather than getting frustrated about what you don't have and connect with people. I think my biggest learning was with a lot of people. I always used to plan that I will meet up with you for coffee, or I'll meet up with you when I travel to your country or to your geographic location, especially with folks in India. But now, when you are on a video call and speaking to all of them, I have connected with a lot of people over video calls, and that was a big learning that you don't have to be physically present to have a connect and a bonding to sustain and continue. And I just hope to continue that in 2021. So these five key ones.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing those. I know we are almost on time. So, Jyoti has a comment. She says that I find senior leaders have executive lifts so that they don't have to travel with us, eat in their office. I don't see them, they don't see me, trust. So, I think she is hinting that sometimes some leaders create that gap between them and the teams. Uh, and sometimes that could create some sort of trust deficit. I believe, Jyoti, that's your point. And I think I agree to that extent to some extent. Anything you want to share on that point?
I'll just give one example. I have worked with a leader who blatantly on my face told me that we are not going to be friends. We are not going to catch up over a drink or something, but I will be the utmost professional with you, and I expect you to be the utmost professional with me. And
Hmm.
I've had a great relationship with this particular individual. So I think it is very important for us to, while we talk about being one family, we talk about having that relationship and a bond, we also need to ensure that at times some leaders like to distance themselves. But at the end of the day, if that does not impact your professionalism or your professional environment, I think it is good enough till the time the common objective is delivered or a common goal is delivered. That's how I would put it.
Yeah, and it's true, right? So it may not necessarily be coming from a sense of being high-handed, right? It could be just where I want to draw my personal boundaries, right? And I think it's okay.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think to each leader will have his or her own style. So Jyoti, it may not always come from that sense that I am aloof and I am different from you. Sometimes it could just be the way people operate, and in some cases, it could be that sense of high identity, right? Okay, perfect. Anybody else has any final questions before we end? We are almost at the 30-minute mark. If you have any specific questions around leadership, trust, or any other questions for Vikram or me, please type in the chat box. Other than that, thank you so much, Vikram, for taking time off and sharing those wisdom with us, with experience. And thank you all those who tuned us today for attending session. It will remain to be a contemporary topic, and we'll hope to invite more visitors talking about this. So we have a question from Parmesh. He says that how to be in line with leaders' expectation in this period apart from trust. So what should, I think his question is more, what should employees do in order to manage expectations? I believe that's, if I could reframe the question.
The simple answer to that, Parmeshwarya, is set expectations right. Both. I mean, to manage expectations is first to set expectations. And like I mentioned before, have a periodic quarterly review. We've always said in HR, ensure performance management is handled well, it is the role of the employee, not the manager. So it is in your hands to manage your own performance, not in your manager's hands. So ensure you set the expectation right. Also from a perspective that you're working from home and there can be other logistical challenges around you, and be very upfront with your line manager or your leader to say, these are the challenges, these are what the expectations are, this would be the review period, and do that. And that's how you just manage the expectations upfront rather than dealing with it later.
So be clear, be transparent. Make sure you highlight what are your challenges around the work environment, any chores you're doing, and any household responsibilities which you have to meet during the day, during the week. So be very clear and open about it. Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else? I don't see any other questions. So yeah, finally, Vikram, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session. I enjoyed the discussion a lot, and I
I
hope
loved it.
everybody who dialed in had key takeaways for them to evolve themselves as leaders who can lead with trust as a new currency for leadership in 2021 and beyond. Thank you so much, Vikram, and have a
Thank you,
nice day.
Harsh.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you
everyone. Have a great
for
year.
today.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.